The industry didn't see this one coming, because this wasn't supposed to explode like this. It started as a few sharp words, a tense exchange, a moment most people thought would pass in the non-stop chaos of celebrity headlines. But then DL Hughley opened his mouth, and suddenly everything Nicki Minaj has been desperately trying to keep quiet was dragged straight into the spotlight. Not rumors, not fan theories. Real questions about money, power, and legal pressure that have been quietly stacking behind the scenes. And the most shocking part? According to insiders, Don Lemon wasn't the story. He was just the spark that set the whole thing on fire. What DL hinted at sent shockwaves through hip-hop and media circles alike. He didn't scream. He didn't rant. He calmly laid out implications that made fans freeze mid-scroll. Suddenly, people were rewatching interviews, rereading lawsuits, and questioning why certain stories about Nicki Minaj always seemed to vanish just as quickly as they appeared. Social media erupted instantly. Barbs went into full defense mode. Critics smelled blood. And within hours, leaked chatter from industry insiders began painting a picture far more chaotic than anyone expected. One involving financial strain, mounting legal pressure, and a narrative that may have been carefully managed for years. What makes this moment different is timing. DL's comments didn't land in a vacuum. They landed while lawsuits swirl, endorsements shift, and silence grows louder from people who used to speak freely. Fans noticed the sudden deletions, the postponed appearances, the aggressive clapbacks that felt less confident and more desperate. And when Don Lemon's name got pulled into the conversation, it cracked open a much bigger question. Was this exposure accidental, or was someone finally letting the truth slip? Because if even half of what's being whispered is real, this isn't just a bad press cycle. This is a collision between money, reputation, and accountability, and it's happening in real time. And now that DL Hughley has said what others wouldn't, the industry isn't asking whether the story will grow. They're asking how much longer it can be contained. It didn't begin as an attack. That's what made it so lethal. One sentence, delivered calmly, almost casually, cut through the noise like a blade wrapped in velvet. When DL Hughley spoke, he didn't raise his voice or throw insults. He asked questions, the kind of questions that echo, the kind that don't need answers to cause damage. And within minutes, the industry realized this wasn't another loud celebrity spat destined to burn out by morning. This was a pressure point being pressed at exactly the wrong time for Nicki Minaj, a moment when whispers about money, lawsuits, and control were already circling behind the scenes like sharks. According to multiple insiders, DL's comments weren't spontaneous. They were informed, carefully phrased but devastating in implication. He referenced patterns, silence where there should have been clarity, aggression where confidence used to live. And then he dropped the line that detonated everything. When people start yelling instead of explaining, it's usually because the math isn't mathing anymore. That was it. No names, no accusations. But everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. Social media caught fire instantly. Clips of the moment spread faster than official statements ever could. Fans froze, critics leaned in. And within hours, a new narrative began clawing its way into the light. Behind the scenes, sources claim Nicki's camp went into immediate containment mode. Group chats allegedly lit up with frantic messages. Lawyers were consulted. PR teams debated whether responding would pour gasoline on the fire or signal weakness. And while the public saw defiant tweets and sharp clapbacks, insiders say the mood privately was anything but confident. Because DL hadn't accused her of one specific thing, he'd done something far worse. He'd invited people to look closer. And when people look closer, they start noticing details they missed before. Old interviews resurfaced where Nicki bristled at questions about contracts. Clips where she abruptly shut down discussions about finances went viral again, now framed as red flags instead of diva behavior. Fans began pulling court documents, timelines, and business filings, stitching together threads that painted a picture far messier than the polished image. None of it definitive, all of it unsettling. And just as the speculation peaked, another name entered the conversation, shifting the entire energy. When Don Lemon was mentioned, everything escalated. Not because he accused anyone, but because of where and how his name surfaced. According to industry chatter, Don had asked questions off camera that never made it to air. Questions about money flows, about accountability, about why certain legal stories never seemed to get traction. When those whispers leaked, fans reframed everything. Don Lemon wasn't the exposé, he was the match. DL Hughley was the accelerant. and Nicki Minaj was suddenly standing in the middle of a narrative she couldn't control with a tweet. What followed was chaos disguised as confidence. Nicki went online, swinging hard, calling out critics, mocking media, daring people to say things to her face. To her supporters, it looked like strength. To skeptics, it looked like deflection. Because underneath the bravado, things started quietly shifting. Appearances were postponed, brand mentions slowed, collaborators went silent. None of it announced, all of it noticed. Fans began asking why someone so dominant suddenly felt so reactive. And that's when the alleged leaks began. Screenshots surfaced from supposed industry insiders claiming that Nicki's financial situation was far more complicated than the public realized. Not broke, not ruined, but tangled, long-term obligations, expensive legal defenses, revenue streams not hitting the way they used to. Again, nothing proven, everything framed as allegedly. But the consistency of the whispers made them harder to ignore. And DLS words echoed louder with every new rumor, when the math isn't mathing. Then came the most damaging twist of this chapter. A former associate, speaking anonymously, told a blog that Nicki's biggest issue wasn't legal trouble, it was leverage. According to them, she was used to being the one with power, the one who could intimidate silence. But when lawsuits and financial pressures stack up, leverage shifts. Suddenly, people who used to be loyal get cautious. Suddenly, favors cost more. Suddenly, yelling doesn't move mountains anymore. That narrative spread like wildfire because it explained everything people were seeing in real time. Nicki's fanbase went to war. They flooded timelines, dragged DL Hughley, accused Don Lemon of bias, and framed the entire situation as a coordinated takedown. But even within the barbs, cracks appeared. Some fans quietly asked questions. Why didn't she just address the claims clearly? Why did every response feel like an attack instead of an explanation? Those questions were met with hostility, but they didn't disappear. They multiplied. And every attempt to silence them only amplified the suspicion. Meanwhile, DL Hughley didn't backtrack. He didn't escalate either. He doubled down by doing nothing. No apology, no clarification, no walk back. Silence from him felt louder than any rant. According to people close to him, he believed the truth didn't need volume. It needed patience. And patience is terrifying when you're on the defensive. The longer he stayed quiet, the more people assumed he knew exactly what he was doing. By the end of the week, the narrative had fully shifted. This was no longer about Don Lemon. This was no longer about a comedian taking shots. This was about whether Nicki Minaj was facing a convergence of legal pressure and financial strain at the exact moment her control over the narrative was slipping. No court had ruled. No documents had confirmed the worst fears. But perception had changed, and in the celebrity world, perception is currency. The final moment of this chapter came quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Nicki deleted a tweet, no explanation, just gone. Fans archived it instantly, but the damage was psychological. Deletions don't scream confidence. They whisper calculation. And in that whisper, one truth became unavoidable. This wasn't over, not even close. Because DL Hughley hadn't exposed everything. He'd exposed the pressure. And pressure, once revealed, only increases. The second wave didn't crash, it crept. And that's what made it terrifying. No trending clip, no viral rant. Just a slow, methodical tightening around the narrative, like someone pulling a drawstring and waiting to see who panics first. By now, everyone knew the names in play. DL Hughley had lit the fuse. Don Lemon had been dragged in as the accidental accelerant. And Nicki Minaj was suddenly facing a storm that didn't respond to bravado. Because this phase wasn't about noise. It was about receipts, leverage, and timing. It began with silence from the places that used to speak loudest. Radio personalities who once defended Nicki relentlessly stopped mentioning her name. Blogs that typically rushed to publish her side hesitated, waiting, as if someone had quietly advised caution. Fans noticed the delay before they noticed the reason. And when the reason started to circulate, it wasn't explosive. It was chilling. According to multiple industry whispers, legal counsel had allegedly advised several outlets to observe, not engage. That phrase alone sent alarm bells ringing. Observe what? Engage with whom? The implication was clear. Something was moving behind the curtain, and reacting too fast could put the wrong people in the crosshairs. Then the financial chatter intensified, not in headlines but in back channels. Music business analysts began speaking in hypotheticals that felt uncomfortably specific. They discussed what happens when touring revenue slows while legal expenses rise. They talked about catalog leverage, advances, and how public confidence affects private negotiations. No one said Nicki's name. They didn't need to. Fans stitched the clips together anyway, adding captions like "connect the dots" and "this isn't random." The conversation shifted from drama to mechanics, and that shift made it impossible to dismiss as mere hate. At the same time, Nicki's online presence grew sharper, not quieter. She posted frequently, aggressively, daring critics to say things to her face. But each post felt less like control and more like urgency. Analysts pointed out the pattern. Rapid-fire tweets, followed by deletions, followed by subtweets that contradicted earlier claims. To supporters, it looked like a woman fighting back. To skeptics, it looked like someone juggling too many fires at once. And in the background of all of it, Hughley remained completely still. That stillness unnerved people. Because while Nicki argued with avatars and Don Lemon's name trended as a "why is he involved?", DL didn't clarify, didn't defend himself, didn't retreat. According to someone close to him, he believed the story would tell itself. That confidence suggested he wasn't bluffing. And when confidence meets chaos, chaos usually loses. Then came the document drop that wasn't a drop at all. A financial filing, publicly accessible but rarely read, began circulating among fan researchers. It didn't prove wrongdoing. It didn't spell disaster, but it raised questions. Questions about obligations, about ongoing disputes, about why certain revenue streams were structured the way they were. Lawyers online cautioned against jumping to conclusions. Fans ignored them and jumped anyway. Threads exploded, hundreds of thousands of views, people debating clauses they barely understood but felt in their gut mattered. As this unfolded, Don Lemon's role became clearer and more uncomfortable. Insiders claimed his questions hadn't been accusatory, just persistent. He allegedly asked why some legal stories seemed to disappear before resolution, why financial disputes settled quietly with no follow-up, why public confidence stayed high even when indicators suggested strain. Those questions, according to the whispers, made certain people nervous long before DL ever spoke. Don Lemon didn't expose anything. He noticed patterns. And pattern recognition is deadly in an industry built on selective attention. The pressure began showing in unexpected places. A collaboration rumor fizzled without explanation. A scheduled appearance was rescheduled indefinitely. A brand quietly removed Nicki from a rotating promo banner, then reinstated her days later after backlash. That back and forth only amplified suspicion. Fans asked why a brand would remove her at all if everything was fine. Silence answered back. And silence, at this stage, was never neutral. Then the emotional fracture hit. In a late-night live session, Nicki's voice cracked for just a second. She recovered instantly, pivoted to jokes, but the clip spread anyway. Millions replayed that moment, slowing it down, analyzing tone, projecting fear or exhaustion depending on allegiance. Psychologists weighed in on stress responses. Critics called it performative. Supporters called it human. But everyone agreed on one thing: the pressure was real. The most damaging rumor of this chapter arrived wrapped in concern. Anonymous sources began suggesting that Nicki's greatest threat wasn't courts or cash, it was credibility erosion. Once people believe something might be wrong, every action gets reinterpreted. Confidence becomes overcompensation. Silence becomes guilt. Defense becomes deflection. And in that environment, even innocent moves look strategic. According to one insider, she's fighting perception, not a case. And perception doesn't play fair. DL Hughley's words resurfaced again, clipped and reposted with new context. When the math isn't mathing, what once sounded like a jab now felt prophetic. Because fans weren't just asking if Nicki had money. They were asking who controlled it, who depended on it, and what happened if it shifted. Power dynamics became the subtext of every conversation. Who benefits from her dominance? Who gets hurt if it falters? Those questions made people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable questions don't disappear quietly. As this phase closed, something subtle but seismic occurred. A respected industry figure, someone known for staying neutral, tweeted, "We confuse loudness with leverage." No names, no follow-up, the tweet stayed up. That alone felt intentional. Fans immediately connected it to the unfolding chaos. And for the first time, even some loyal supporters paused, because loudness had been everywhere. Leverage, that was suddenly in question. The chapter ended not with an explosion, but with a pause so heavy it felt like the inhale before impact. Nicki was still speaking. DL was still silent. Don Lemon remained a shadow in the background. And the industry, watching all of it, seemed to be waiting for one thing: proof. Because once proof enters the room, no amount of shouting can drown it out. The third wave didn't ask permission. It arrived with receipts energy, the kind that doesn't scream but doesn't blink either. By now, the industry had stopped pretending this was just noise. The silence from power centers was no longer strategic, it was protective. And at the center of the pressure cooker stood Nicki Minaj, facing a moment where every move carried weight, every word recalibrated perception, and every pause was interpreted as strategy or surrender, depending on who was watching. The chatter had matured. This wasn't fandom versus haters anymore. This was influence versus exposure. What changed everything was a coordinated release that felt surgical, not a leak, an alignment. Within hours, 3 separate commentators with no obvious connection posted analyses that mirrored each other in tone and timing. Each avoided accusations. Each focused on structure. How money moves, how legal costs compound, how reputations function as collateral. None named Nicki outright. All roads led there. Fans noticed the symmetry. Analysts noticed the restraint. And that restraint suggested counsel. When narratives start wearing suits, it's because something real is being protected. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered that negotiations were happening. Not court negotiations, but narrative ones. Who speaks? Who waits? Who says less so someone else can say more later? According to one source, this is the phase where everyone decides what hill they're willing to die on. For Nicki, that hill looked like public defiance. For others, it looked like distance. Collaborators grew quieter. Affiliates stopped amplifying. Even longtime defenders softened their language, pivoting from certainty to empathy. That shift mattered. Empathy is what people reach for when facts aren't on their side yet. Then came the legal undertone that finally pushed this beyond entertainment. A set of filings, again, public again, technical, started circulating with annotations from lawyers on social media. Nothing explosive, nothing definitive, but enough to show friction, enough to show time, enough to show money being spent to keep doors closed rather than opened. Commentators emphasized that none of this proved guilt. Fans countered that it proved pressure. And pressure, as history has taught the industry, forces choices. Amid all of this, Hughley re-entered the conversation without re-entering it at all. A clip resurfaced from years earlier where he spoke about power and accountability, entirely unrelated at the time, now chilling in hindsight. When the spotlight shifts, he said back then, you find out who was standing on their own and who was leaning on the light. That line went viral anew. People didn't share it to attack, they shared it to understand. Because understanding had become the real currency. And then there was Don Lemon, still officially uninvolved, unofficially unavoidable. His name appeared in captions as shorthand for a question that wouldn't go away. Why do some stories stall while others sprint? Why do certain narratives get oxygen while others suffocate? Media critics began writing think pieces about gatekeeping without naming names. Viewers connected dots anyway. When trust in process erodes, even neutral observers become symbols. Nicki's response strategy grew more complex. She posted less often but with more intention. Longer captions, fewer jokes. Statements framed as resilience rather than retaliation. Supporters applauded the shift. Critics saw calculation. Both could be true. What no one could deny was the tonal change. The edge softened into something like resolve. And resolve, when paired with scrutiny, can either stabilize a story or set it up for a harder fall. The most pivotal moment arrived quietly. A delayed release announcement that didn't specify a new date. No explanation beyond logistics. Logistics, the industry knows, is code for negotiation. Fans split instantly. Some argued this proved external interference. Others said it was smart business under pressure. Analysts noted that timing is leverage, and leverage is expensive. The delay didn't confirm chaos, but it confirmed stakes. Then came the turn that reframed everything. A respected financial commentator posted a thread about celebrity liquidity, how wealth on paper differs from cash in motion, how legal defense drains differently than production budgets. Again, no names. Again, unmistakable relevance. The thread went viral among non-fans, people who don't care about feuds, only frameworks. That's when the conversation crossed a line. When outsiders start paying attention, the bubble bursts. Nicki's camp pushed back with optimism. Select allies posted praise. Old collaborators resurfaced with fond memories. The message was unity. The effect was mixed. Unity looks strongest when it's consistent. This felt curated. Fans appreciated the effort. Skeptics archived everything. Archiving had become a sport, and sports keep score. As the dust swirled, one more rumor cut through with unsettling precision: arbitration. Not a lawsuit, not a trial. Quiet rooms, confidential outcomes. According to whispers, that was where the real battles lived: off camera, off record, expensive by design. If true, it explained the careful language, the absence of denials, the focus on tone over facts. Arbitration doesn't reward loudness, it rewards leverage. The chapter closed with an image rather than a quote. Nicki on stage, spotlight tight, crowd loud. She smiled, she performed, she commanded. For a moment, everything felt normal. And then the camera caught it. The pause between songs, the glance off stage, the breath held just a beat too long. Millions saw it. Millions projected meaning onto it. Power still radiated, but so did weight. And that's where this story stands. Not resolved, not exploded. Suspended. The kind of suspension that precedes decisions. D.L. Hughley never claimed to be the judge. Don Lemon never claimed to be the whistleblower. Nicki Minaj never admitted to anything. But the ecosystem around them shifted, and ecosystems don't lie. They respond. Because in the end, this wasn't about one comment or one interview. It was about what happens when questions land during a vulnerable season. When money, law, and image intersect. When the spark doesn't cause the fire, but reveals the smoke that was already there. And whatever comes next won't be decided by tweets. It will be decided by leverage, timing, and who can afford to wait the longest. If you're still here, understand this clearly. This isn't just another celebrity story you casually consume and forget. This is one of those moments where silence decides the outcome. Stories like this don't disappear because they're false. They disappear because attention moves on. And once attention moves on, narratives get rewritten, cleaned up, and handed back to you as something safer, simpler, and far less true. Liking this video isn't support for a side, it's a signal that you're paying attention. Commenting isn't drama, it's documentation. Every interaction keeps this conversation alive long enough for the next piece to surface, and trust this. Stories at this level never stop with one wave. They stall, they breathe, and then they come back heavier. Subscribing isn't about notifications, it's about staying present when the tone changes, when receipts replace speculation, and when the people who were loud suddenly go quiet. If you leave now, you'll come back later asking how everything shifted so fast. If you stay, you'll see it happen in real time. This channel doesn't chase outrage after it's settled, it follows pressure while it's still building. And pressure always reveals more than performance ever could. So don't scroll past this like it's just noise. Drop a comment, even if it's just one word. Hit like so this doesn't get buried. Subscribe so you're here when the next turn happens, because it will. And when it does, you'll want to say you saw it coming, not that you missed it.